Welcome. Well, I am joined by Associate Professor of International Relations from Wits University, Vishos Sadgar. We are going to talk about climate issues and the global climate strike. Mr. Sadgar, welcome.
Thank you.
Professor, let's start with the Friday strike that happened here in South Africa and globally. What really happened and what were the issues that you guys were trying to press?
Well, this was of world historical significance because our children and our youth, inspired by Greta Thunberg, took to the streets. It's estimated about 4 million protesters were on the streets on September 20th.
4 million.
This is one of the biggest climate justice actions that we've seen on the planet. And basically, there were several calls coming from these actions. The one was intergenerational justice as integral to climate justice. The young people are recognizing that as climate change worsens, their futures are in jeopardy. In the next 10 to 20 years, we are going to be living in a dramatically transformed world. I think the second issue that was coming out very strongly was that they wanted action. They wanted decisive action from the leadership on the planet and even in the country.
On that one, action. Is there some sort of action that's been taken here in South Africa? Most precisely, looking at the leadership, is there something that they are doing to fight climate change and to make the future sustainable for the youth?
Well, the South African government has a performative approach to its climate diplomacy. It is signed up to the Paris Climate Agreement, which is one of the main agreements right now. It has certain policies around adaptation. It has scenarios, but it really doesn't add up. Because South Africa, at the same time, is addicted to fossil fuels. We are into promoting fracking and offshore extraction, the total gas find. We are one of the largest coal users on the continent, the highest polluter, actually, on the continent. And that's still part of our energy mix. That's still part of our policy trajectory. At the same time, our government is really not learning lessons from the current drought. One of the worst droughts in the history of this country. And this is a window into the future. And yet, by 2018, almost 4 years into the drought, the government declared emergency after our food system collapsed. Right now, Katse Dam, one of the main feeder dams from the Lesotho Highlands, is highly compromised. This is going to deepen the crisis as we go forward.
Wow, that's really scary. Now, also looking at the drought that we've had and the scarcity of water in sub-Saharan country like South Africa, looking at the near future, is there a chance of any of this to happen again? And will it be the same size, or is it expected to be even more or worse in the near future?
So the consensus in the climate science is that the El Nino-induced drought that we had was one of the strongest ever. And we are a country that is drought-prone. We have a drought cycle. And we are normally they last 3 years. This particular drought is actually extending to a 5-year period.
5 years.
And the climate scientists tell us that the water we have in all our dams in South Africa, private and public dams, can really last us for 5 years. So as we go into a heating world, we're going to really have to rethink water resources in communities, in cities, in towns. We're going to have to think of various solutions to ensure that our water systems are resilient and sustainable.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, but there's also this term that I've heard that it's being pushed. They say climate justice, and then it comes into the Climate Justice Charter. I just want you to explain to us, what is Climate Justice Charter and what's really happening with that?
Firstly, climate justice is about recognizing that this problem on climate change has a 150-year history. It's mainly the industrialized, rich countries that are responsible, and they owe a climate debt to the world. At the same time, climate justice recognizes that the impacts of climate change, whether it's droughts, whether it's floods, are going to hit the poorest the hardest, including the poorest countries on our planet. And that has begun. Now, the Climate Justice Charter comes out of 5 years of campaigning in South Africa through the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign, where we saw the disproportionate impacts of the drought on the poorest in our society. We've had numerous dialogues with constituencies in the society, and we are basically taking this charter next year to Parliament. We are claiming the right in the Constitution to assert this charter.
So you're saying next year. And climate change, is it happening now, or is it going to start to happen next year?
So we're at a 1 degree Celsius increase in planetary temperature. So the world has changed dramatically. Catastrophic climate change has begun, and it's going to worsen. But the problem we have in South Africa is that there's definitely a knowledge and information gap.
Yeah.
54% of South Africans don't know about climate change.
That's an issue.
17% of South Africans are not climate literate. They don't even are climate literate. They are the minority that understand the science. So we are trying to raise awareness next year with the Climate Justice Charter process in society. We'll be taking it to various communities. We'll be having assemblies. We'll be having conversations. And hopefully the national debate will happen on the solutions that we'll be putting forward.
Okay, I see. It sounds as if you do have plans to, like, okay, we're going to take this information even to the young ones, those in schools who don't know about it yet. Though we have seen that it was most of the youth who were on the streets on Friday, you know, chatting and fighting against climate change. Now, the main issue is our politicians. Are they aware? Do they have enough information about this?
There's no excuse from our politicians. There's been almost 5 assessment reports from the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change. This is the advisory panel to the UN. Our government participates in that process. Actually, all governments of the world. They all have known for over 20 years that this is a problem. It's a dangerous problem for all of us, and it's going to worsen. Currently, the 1.5 degrees Celsius report of the UN IPCC put out last year in October raised the alarm bell the loudest. And there's a study that's just going to the New York meeting of the UN, looking at the risks and benefits and consequences of 1.5 degrees Celsius. And essentially, it's telling climate policy makers, politicians all over the world that if we don't act now, this will become a more costly problem, a more complex problem, and a more dangerous problem. So there's no excuse. Our parties in South Africa really don't have a serious commitment to this issue. And as I've been saying, I think that there's cognitive dissonance. There's denialism, but there's also policy insanity, actually, because the science is there. It means we have to be making hard choices. And there are also solutions. The children are pointing to these solutions. Trade unions are pointing to these solutions. Faith-based communities are pointing to these solutions, and citizens are. It's time for decisive action now.
Okay, so now let's come back to just South Africa, because I heard you saying that the politicians, some of them, they're not taking it very serious. But do we have a platform as scientists to politicians, information sharing, so for them to know what's really going on and the evidence that are really happening within our boundaries?
So there is a responsibility at the level of the government to educate itself. It sits in these processes. We have amazing science in South Africa at our universities, the South African Weather Service, etc. There's enough of a knowledge base in this country to empower intelligent policy making right now in this country. But we also have an important role for the media in this regard, to bridge this gap and to inform our society. We need to mainstream climate news in South Africa. And I noticed you were giving weather reporting. I'm hoping as we go forward that the SABC now mainstreams climate news. It becomes mainstream in our print media and our radio. Most South Africans get their news from radio. And hopefully there'll be important programming that happens around this on a regular and a consistent basis.
Well, I can tell you that the SABC is in it, and we are already doing it well. That was Associate Professor from Wits, Vishos Sadgar. Thank you very much. And you're still watching Money Live. Stay tuned. We'll see you just after the break.